Okay. All right, so are you all looking at my screen now?
Perfect. Presentation.
Oh, okay, excellent. And then I need to find a way to see all of you. Ah, yes, here we go. Okay. So can we see the participants, who's here and who's not? Shannon, do you know? Shannon, are you there?
Let me quickly leave a note to her
Okay.
so that.
Let's see, maybe if I move over here. No. Okay, that's okay.
Ooh.
Ah. Hi, Ego. How are you?
There are two Eileen here.
There are two.
Yes, so I see. Let me see. We can see her here, but I don't think you can see or hear us. Yes, if we can communicate with Shannon, I think she has a control here.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not sure she.
No, that's even worse. I'm trying to get a, I guess it doesn't really matter, but.
Oh, okay.
Iko, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi.
Hi, Molly.
How's it going?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, good.
So actually, two of the participants sent a message through the Q&A. They said they can see us and hear us.
Oh, okay.
But
Well,
we
then I
cannot
suppose
see
we can
them.
just start, right?
I guess so. Shannon, if you can hear us, so maybe we can start. Not sure. Okay, maybe just let's start.
Okay. All right, great. So, hi, everyone. I'm Molly Epstein, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. Today, we're going to focus on your negotiation skills, some fundamentals, and then how you can begin to plan for your own negotiations. So, can you all put things in the chat? Let's see. Show chat. Yeah, so if you can, just let me know, because as questions come up, I'm happy to answer them. Also, we'll have time at the end for you to ask any questions. All right, so let's get started. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about negotiation basics and then move on. So to start, what is negotiation? Well, it is an important part of everyday life. And it's a method for us to reach mutually satisfying outcomes. It's not a debate, but rather it's an opportunity for resolution. And we're best able to resolve if we give each other the information that our partners need to convince them of our positions. So specifically, what is it? Well, it is that back and forth communication. We need to interact, to ask questions, and to listen to responses. And once we have that flow of communication going, then we're looking at the interpersonal decision-making process. So put your hand up in the chat if you think that you have strong interpersonal communications. And put your hand up or say yes. Okay, well, let me know as we go on if you change your mind on that. So think about negotiation as a collaborative conversation that moves us toward that mutually agreeable solution, that is our goal. So when we think about defining characteristics of negotiations, We want to think about the fact that we seek optimal outcomes. And that's not always money. It's not only money. And as we look at different examples, we can decide. But we also know that one of the characteristics is that we don't have complete information about what we need to know from our partner. So as a negotiator, I possess incomplete information. And the only way that I'm going to get that completed information is by asking questions and then listening to the responses. So going into a negotiation, we can assume that there are conflicting interests. If there weren't conflicting interests, it wouldn't be a negotiation, but rather it would be simply a conversation between two people who want the same outcome. We also know that in communication, that in negotiation, communication is possible and that solutions are possible. It might not be the ultimate solution. However, it might be a step toward the solution. So something intermediate or a step going there. Okay, so why should we negotiate? Well, first of all, we can earn more or pay less. We can resolve conflicts in a way that creates a lasting, positive relationship. As we negotiate with others, especially in integrative negotiation, we have the opportunity to create values for both parties in the negotiation. Some specific things that you can do is to negotiate so that you can move more quickly into positions of advancement. So for example, you might be able to negotiate a new title or more responsibilities. And of course, always the issue of negotiating for more compensation. As you negotiate, you also can establish that reputation for being confident and assertive. So even if going into a project or a new position, if you don't get what you negotiate for, you've established yourself as someone who is savvy, confident, and assertive. So you do enhance the way that you are perceived as you move into a new position. I'm watching the chat here to see if any questions come up. So here's an example. We talked about salary, and I know that one of the things that we think of most frequently is negotiating that salary. So imagine this, two 30-year-old graduates are offered $100,000 upon graduation. One candidate negotiates $110,000. The other accepts the initial offer of only $100,000. So that's only a $10,000 change at the start. And if you are in double that bracket, imagine double the numbers that we're going to look at. But essentially, for a candidate who negotiates $110,000 in the beginning, earns up to $30,000 more, $31,000, even if they never get a huge raise. So if you assume a 30% yearly raise, that equals an increase in your salary of almost $31,000. Also, in your retirement, you're looking at $100.6 million in retirement. Now that's assuming a 5% return on investment of that extra, that $10,000 additional yearly income. So those are some pretty significant numbers. Now we're all watching the mortgage rates these days as everything is increasing. But imagine this, the interest accumulation can be enormous. And we call both the salary and the interest, it can be a disadvantage if you start at a higher price. So let's imagine that this house listed near Emory's campus for $795,000 can be accomplished at a 6.5% fixed interest for 30 years. You put $20,000 down. So I'll let you do the numbers as you play around with this in your own lives, but imagine that one person pays the asking price of $795,000, which is happening a lot now with real estate. Someone else negotiates $50,000 less, in their savings over time, you can work out on your own, but it is in fact quite significant. I see the chat seems to be disabled. Okay, no problem. So think about what that looks like 30 years later, because it will be a significant amount that you can save. All right, so I hope I've made the case for why you should negotiate, clarified what it is, and now let's move forward into what to see, what you want to think about, and how you'll enter into negotiations. So first of all, we have so many ways that we don't negotiate well. And the number one is what we call the money trap, which is where we focus only on the financial aspects and not on the others. So here's the issue. Most people are not very good at negotiation. That even if they're trained, some things tend to get in the way, that our egos get in the way, our willingness to be aggressive gets in the way, and sometimes just the desire to create peace. So 80% of executives and CEOs who are usually trained in negotiation fall prey to at least one trap. So agreement bias is our most common trap. And we'll look at that in depth in a moment. But there's also what we call the lose-lose trap, where you leave money on the table. And that is because the conversations don't happen, that we don't go back and forth to identify the other's needs and to see if we can't find a way that we both win in this. The third one is what we call the winner's curse, where we settle for too little, that we get a little bit ahead. We want to end the negotiation just because it may be painful. And so even though we've won a little, we walk away without fully understanding what the full benefits could be. There's also hubris, which is when we tend to walk away from the negotiation because we become offended at something. Okay, so now I've learned that I need to look at the Q&A. Let's see. Gosh, we have 10 already. Okay, so let me move you over here so I can always see you. Okay, so you all can see and hear us. Nope, I can't see hands. We're in a different function. Okay. Not the chat. I'll quit referring to that. All right, so thank you. Very helpful. Okay, so back to the number one way that we fall prey to a trap, the agreement bias. So let's dig a little bit more deeply into that. So why is it so prevalent? And we fall into agreement bias when we begin to feel uncomfortable. And so, as we mentioned before, that is when we settle for terms that can even be worse than our current situation. So we do this when we experience cognitive dissonance. And that becomes greater as we invest more time and more effort into a negotiation. So we experience that sense of psychological distress when we're facing inconsistent values, behavior, or cognition. And at that point, we begin to drive to make them consistent. And we usually do that by going toward agreement no matter what. Again, it can be that discomfort where people want to make that negotiation end. All right. So any questions on agreement bias or our desire to reach peace? I can now see the Q&A, so I'm happy to look at that. All right. So I have a little quiz for you. What I'd like you to do is to put in your best guesses on this. Just take a moment, jot them down or think of them, and we're going to go through each one of these. I call this the estimation game. So take about, let's say about a minute and answer each of these questions. I'm going to start my timer here. Okay, so wrap up your answers and let's take a look at how you did. So pull out your best estimates and know that if you brewed your coffee at home for 30 years instead of buying that $3 latte 5 days a week, you would save $55,000 over 3 years. Now, some folks say, oh, that's not worth it because I love my coffee. And that's okay, because what we're trying to prove here is whether or not we're good at guessing. So how did you do? Were you able to identify that approximate number? The amount of time wasted, 115 hours each year. It's pretty significant. Then the median age of US citizens. With your backgrounds, you probably got this right, 38 and a half. This one always fascinates me. The percentage of Fortune 500 companies that purchase kidnap insurance, 71%. Kidnap insurance for their executives and families. Another one, the bottom one, how many endangered mammal species were listed in the US in 22? I was going to guess 180. It's only 66. All right, so why are we playing this ridiculous game and what does it have to do with negotiation? Well, the answer is this, that individuals, Mom, my picture's weird there. Individuals are usually grossly overconfident, that we are so much, we're usually wrong, and we're overconfident about our ability to estimate. Also, teams are significantly more overconfident and less accurate than individuals. So the more people we get together, the less accurate we become. That overconfidence can hold us back. Some of the reasons that that can hold us back is that we begin to make very inaccurate assumptions based on a limited knowledge base. So what can we do to reduce that bias? Remember, we talked about traps. The traps are based on bias, and our decision-making can also be influenced by bias in negotiation. So the first thing you can do is realize that we are biased, that we come toward these negotiations with bias, and try to figure out how your experience plus your expertise can take away that bias. Debiasing is a way that we can check ourselves and try to accommodate for the fact that we carry bias. The outsider view, take yourself out of the negotiation and see what you would come up with. Go to facts, such as linear models and algorithms. And then remember, we said that ideally it's a conversation between two people. Understand the biases of others by asking questions about it. The more we can remove the bias, the better we will be able to make decisions within the negotiation. Okay, so let's look at two types of negotiation. They focus on this, that distributive negotiation sees the benefits, the outcome as a fixed size or a little pie. When you take out the piece, you lose the rest. So giving up something in the negotiation or conceding it is seen as losing a portion of a fixed amount. However, in integrated negotiation, our goal is to make that pie bigger So yes, we'll still concede and lose a piece. However, both of us stand to gain more. So let's dig more deeply into that. So in distributive negotiation, or the small pie, we call that claiming negotiation. It involves one issue that's usually price. And it goes back to that win-lose situation. If we go to integrative or value creation, then it involves two or more issues, not just one. So it might include price and responsibility. It might include price and a long-term commitment. So it creates that sense of a win-win possibility that both parties can get what they want. It integrates the goals of both to create that win-win. And it also means that in order to create value, we need to bring creative thinking and collaborative problem solving to the negotiation. Okay. So who can give me an example of a distributive negotiation? So in other words, the claiming or the small pie. You can put it in the Q&A. What's an example? So let's think of that as a negotiation for the canned, cold Starbucks beverages that you buy at the grocery store. So Starbucks goes to the retailer and they say, I'm going to give you a 10% discount if you purchase more. And so that leads us to, well, what do? Do I purchase more? Or do I try to get other benefits of it? And they might say, okay, yes, we will take that 10% and purchase more, but let's go back to the integrative, the creative problem solving. What they might say is, we will also give you coolers that you can put at the front of your checkouts that will increase your sales and enable you to make more money and have coolers that you can repurpose for other things. So if you've ever seen those impulse purchase coolers at the checkout, that's a great example of this, because that's something that's paid for by the Starbucks manufacturer, Starbucks corporate. Okay, so let's not fight over money, but let's go for that distributive, for the integrative agreements. The way we do that is by building trust, providing information, and making sure that we go back and forth in our conversation, that we want to look at that mutually beneficial trade-off. And we might trade something that's not of great value for something that is of great value. So we create new options that satisfy both parties. So for example, the coolers at the checkout counters, where you can grab your can of cold Starbucks. All right, so when you approach a negotiation, the number one thing you can do is to make sure that you prepare. And in those, you're going to need 3 pieces of information. We'll go through each one of these: your BATNA, your reservation price, and your goals or your target point. Okay, so the first thing, what is your BATNA? Your BATNA is your best alternative to negotiated agreement. And what we think of it as is the standard measure of any proposed agreement. That the best alternative ensures that we are not agreeing to terms that are too unfavorable, or that we're rejecting terms that are in our own best interest. So to create your BATNA, you'll decide what your range is. What do we expect, and what are we willing to settle for or work toward? Next thing, your reservation price is your bottom line. So what we call that is your walkaway price. The point at which you are indifferent and you decide that you're not willing to continue the negotiation, that you were not able to agree to terms. So if your reservation price cannot be met, it's time to walk away. It's really important for you to do that before you begin the negotiation, because remember all of those traps that we can fall into. Have that really clear before you start. Okay, so we've got your BATNA, which is your best alternative. The next is your reservation price or your walkaway price. Your reservation price then, sorry, a little mismanagement there. Your reservation price should be based on opportunity costs or what you'll miss out on for this agreement, any switching costs. So in a job, for example, moving from a current employer to another one is considered a switching cost because you have to uproot, meet new colleagues, etc. You can also base it on your ego. I am not willing to settle for anything less because I am worth that $300,000 salary. You can also base it on your preferences. That if your preference is to transfer to an organization that is located in San Francisco versus New York, you can figure that in as well. And remember that emotions can get stuck in there too. Okay, so your ideal outcome is your target price. So as you set that target, be ambitious yet realistic. So if you see that the job range is 120,000 to 270,000, you'll want to be on the high end, but likely not go too far, not go twice the amount that you're offered. And do your research here for the target price. Figure out what's realistic, try to benchmark it with others, and figure out how hard you can negotiate toward that target. Then analyze your other party's reservation price and BATNA. Now, ideally, you won't give it up on your own, but through conversations, you can begin to analyze your negotiation partner's boundaries for negotiation. And then throughout the negotiation, make sure that you focus on your target price and being true to that and never losing focus. And then focus the other party on their reservation price, which is typically the highest one that they'll go to. So when we enter into negotiation, we look at anchoring as making that first move. The reason that this is important is that we, being most people, cling to the first piece of information we receive. So if you were to start the negotiation, let's use that job example, and you put in your first anchoring offer is $280,000 or the max salary. Then that shapes the negotiation moving forward because they're working specifically from that 280 and perhaps trying to negotiate down. Versus if you started at 210, the likelihood would be that they'll negotiate down. So start it high by anchoring first. Always anchor first. Okay, here's another term that we want to know, the ZOPA, or Zone of Possible Agreement. So let's say we're purchasing, an Airbnb overseas for a month. And you as a buyer have a reservation price at $9,900 for a month. And you as the buyer might also say, because you know that you want something really beautiful, that your target price might be to go, I don't know, maybe $6,900. The key is for us to realize here that our zone of possible agreement is where the buyer's reservation, the buyer's zone of possible agreement overlaps with the seller's. So we've got those two overlapping areas in our expectations. So in other words, it is, we'll look at the easy one here, which is that you're within the zone of possible agreement when the buyer's reservation is greater than the seller's. However, if the buyer's reservation is less than the seller's, there is no opportunity to meet that zone of possible agreement. So let's go back for a moment to this. So if your prices are this far out of line, that there's no overlap in them, then what we see is that there's no zone of possible agreement. And if neither one of you is willing to budge, then there's no possible positive outcome. So here's the thing. Remember, we talked about your reservation price. If your reservation price is not met, as in this case, the best bet for you is to walk away, to just walk away and end the negotiation. Okay. So when we have those integrative agreements where we have been creative in our thinking, we have negotiated and been flexible, we have focused on conceding low priority points for ourselves, but fighting for high priority points, making those concessions and receiving concessions from the other party. That's our integrative agreement. And what we find then is that we're able to improve outcomes. We can prevent impasses, so that walking away for any of the traps. We can then leave with a strengthened relationship, respect for one another, a desire to do business again. And we create a more stable agreement. Because we don't want to say that. Sometimes then the agreement can fall apart after the parties walk away. So we want that stability within the agreement. Okay. So remember, I talked about how we have the ability to concede what we want and then to encourage the points that we most want. So what we want to do then is work toward that package deal where we're negotiating multiple issues at once rather than sequencing them one at a time. Because what happens is that when we look at just the one agreement at a time, we can shut down the negotiation if there's one low priority issue that we can't agree upon early. So instead, our best approach is to share lots of information up front and then to be willing to concede based on understanding of what we see as low priority and what our negotiation partner might. So again, that requires you to be transparent and to be honest and willing to concede. So those package deals are the ones that create the most ideal outcome and give you what you want as well as most likely what your partner wants. Okay, so at this point, let's take a break and see if I can answer any of your questions. I'm going to look at those questions and pause my slides for just a moment here. I know that we collected some questions. So if you're feeling shy, then Yilin can pose some of those questions and we can have a conversation that way. But no pressure on you.
No, I actually have a good question when you talk about this, the package instead of issue by issue. I think this is
Yes.
I think it's useful for our early career investigators. That is, for postdoctors too. That is when you try to negotiate a new job. So how do you negotiate a startup fund or, a balance between teaching load versus your research or clinical responsibility?
Right.
And then those are, I think it should be addressed in a package, right? And
Yeah.
should have reached agreement at the beginning. So do you have some tips on that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great example for us to use here. So your goal moving into this will be, first of all, to spend a lot of time planning, right? And look at the value of those multiple issues: research time, budget, employees or research assistants. So go ahead of time, think very carefully about what is the most important to you, and think also of those if-then issues. So if I'm able to get 6 research assistants, then I might be able to have fewer hours or a lower proportion of my time devoted to research. So make a list of what's most important to you. And then also think of those if-then things, because many of them are interdependent. Was that a good answer, Yilin?
Yeah, I think so. I think it takes time, just like your earlier slides, like it takes expertise and experience. And
Yes.
that give you a more objective outsider view about, really negotiate what you want.
Mhm.
But yes, we're looking forward to the following talk.
Well, good. And so another thing to think about is, as you're negotiating at work, you'll want to think about the timeline, right? When you are especially a new or young faculty member, you don't have a lot of power yet. However, one of the things you have to your advantage is time. So if your employer or your manager proposes something, know that you don't have to agree to it right away. That you can say, I'm going to need to think about that. Give me the weekend. And so by expanding the timeline and not forcing yourself into something, then you have the opportunity to really think it through and make a counter offer if that's what's best for your outcome. But think very carefully about it beforehand, and then don't feel pressured into quick decisions.
That is helpful. Thank you, Molly.
Good, sure, of course. Any other questions? One of the things that women tend to experience is a hesitancy to negotiate, because we don't want to have any negative perceptions by our negotiating partners, even if they're women. So this is a desire not to negotiate as hard. And then there's also the issue of some of the things that we as women do that create the impression that we lack power. So for example, some of the typical communication things that we as women do is to follow comments with a question. So for example, I'm willing to give up X% research time if you're willing to give me 4 more research assistants. Okay? We do those tag questions. Is that all right? Do you mind? So we'll want to go in with that really straightforward confidence that eliminates some of those verbal things that we do that detracts from our sense of power and confidence. Because remember, your negotiation partner is thinking about how hard they can push you. And if you show any lack of confidence or a desire to be liked, then they're likely to push harder. Anything else on that?
Yes, I don't see any from our Q&A.
Okay.
for
Do you
now.
want to pull some from the questions that were submitted beforehand?
Yes, if you like to address that, I like you bring up, the woman's desire to be not like pushing hard at the negotiation. That's really putting us in a disadvantaged status. But being confident is nice, but how to balance this, not being overconfident, especially when you are junior, that you don't have a lot of power, just like you mentioned. But at the same time, making your points very clear at the table. Yes, just hoping to get some tips about this balance.
Sure. So the number one thing that any negotiator has to their advantage is preparation in determining what your boundaries are, your BATNA, your reservation price, and then working to identify what that zone of possible agreement is. So going in prepared is key. The next thing is gaining as much information as you can from your negotiation partner. Now, you can even begin that before the negotiation happens while you're in that getting to know you chit-chat phase. So, for example, you might hear them say things about their views of the organization that they are negotiating for. So, for example, they might say something like, well, budgets tend to be really, really tight here. Or they might say, one of my greatest frustrations is that as a new researcher, I didn't have nearly the resources I needed. Okay, so as you listen to that, you're gaining information about points where they might be sympathetic or more negotiable, where your partner might advocate for you if they need to work toward getting you more money or more resources. So get that information as much as you can. As you begin the negotiation, keep in mind that you're going for that integrative negotiation. And you get that information by asking questions, even as the negotiation begins. And you can say, okay, now that we're in the negotiation, I'd really like to get some insight from you. What is it that you hope to walk away with after our conversation? They might or might not say, well, I don't know. We have to see where that goes. Okay. Then you can say, so of the many different things that we're looking at today, which are the most important to you? And then they might say then, well, that depends. What are you talking about? You can say, well, the way I see it, we have several different options. We have the option to look at the salary, a relocation package, lab space, and support from research assistants. So I see those as all part of the negotiation. They'd be like, oh yeah. And if you've done your work, then those will in fact be those things. So the next step then would be, after you introduce those, to say, which are the most important to you? What do you think will most enable me to benefit the organization? So that exchange of information, that questioning, that helps you get a better idea of what is important to your negotiation partner. Then, during the negotiation, take your time, right? Don't feel like you have to agree to something right away. And don't feel like you have to talk all the time either. Be aware that one of the greatest tools you have is silence. So that right there was an 8-second pause. And in a tense situation, that might feel like an eternity. However, there's 2 benefits to silence for you. One is that it gives your negotiation partner time to think it through. Let them process this information. And silence means that you're not backtracking, right? That you don't immediately sense defeat and then jump in with another offer. So put that offer out there and then just let it sit for a moment. So for example, you might say, well, I'm willing to have fewer research assistants if I have more clinical hours. Give it that 8 to 10 second pause, rather than immediately following up with, well, no, I guess that's too much. I could take fewer of both, fewer research assistants and fewer hours. No, we do that too much. And that's not a gendered thing. That's a confidence element. So you might give that silence after your partner makes an offer and then see if they backtrack on themselves. So go in really comfortable with silence.
Yes, Molly, we got 3 excellent questions.
Oh,
I
good.
think.
Let's hear them.
Yes, so we have a participant want you to give some advice about negotiating mid-career with an existing position, like how to get a raise. And we also have another participant want to know that, if we are underpowered, especially, from a minority background, underrepresented. So what might be a good advice to get our negotiation more efficient?
Good. So mid-career and negotiating from a position of lower power. Is that correct?
Yes, you can
Okay.
take a look at our Q&A.
All right, good. So one of the benefits of being that mid-career negotiator is that you have a solid background. So let's say you're 10 years in. Then you've got 10 years worth of success to use as evidence for why you should get what you're negotiating. So you've got that evidence. You've also got lots of resources available to you. So for example, mid-career, you've got a strong network of peers. So you can begin to get those benchmarks. What are other institutions doing? What are other individuals in your same rank doing? And at that point, you likely also have mentors who can give you an insider's view to the possibilities, right? That they might say, well, I know you could push harder for that because we do have a history of providing X. So you've got the advantage of leveraging your network. As far as coming from a position of low power, if you are someone coming from outside the industry, if you are a woman, if you are a member of an underrepresented group, then your best option here is practice, 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 right? That we tend to be less assertive and less risk-taking when we come from low power positions. So the challenge here is bringing up that confidence level. And the greatest way we can do that is by practicing the negotiation. We'll talk about practicing techniques in a moment, but remember that you don't have to agree to anything immediately, that you can put off a negotiation. So let's say you have your standard meeting with a supervisor, and you think you're just going to give them an update on your research. But what you discover is that now they've offered you another position and they're expecting you to negotiate on the spot. It is okay for you to say, this is something that I didn't expect, but it's very important to me. So what I'd like to do is take some time to prepare before we have this conversation. And if they push, 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 because if they push you into something you're not prepared for, you're at even a greater disadvantage. Then what you can say is, I'm just not ready. I'm not ready for this negotiation right now. And I'm not comfortable negotiating now, and just shut it down. Because one of the greatest ways that someone in high power can bring you to lower power is to force you to do something when you're not ready and get you to agree to terms that you don't fully understand.
Yes, I don't know you have additional slides or not. So one more question. So what is the pros and cons of negotiation over email? Just quick answer, maybe we'll finish that.
Yes. Okay. So there are some things that are actually easier over email, because especially people who come from a lower place of power, we feel more comfortable being assertive and making aggressive offers or statements on email because we have that sense of distance. We have distance, and additionally, we have time to prepare our answers. So you're not in an immediate back and forth in most cases, but you can go back, think it through, compare your ideas to your BATNA. You can compare it to your reservation and your target price. So it gives you the luxury of time and the ability to say things without having to address an immediate response.
Yeah,
Okay,
that
let's see. I'm
sounds
looking. What else can you do to be more efficient without needing more? Oh, okay. So is he more like, yeah, you're right about that. And then what else can you do to be more efficient without needing more resources? Okay, and so this is something that you would hear from the person in power. Is that correct? And if so, then that's a good question, right? What do you need to do to be more efficient? And that is also a question that you can say that you need to think about. Let me go back and think about that. And then in that process, what you can think about is, what is currently preventing you from being efficient? And what would it look like to remove that? What would that look like? Now that we've put that question out there, we can all prepare for it, because it's a really good question. What else can you do to be more efficient without needing more resources? That we can begin to think about it and have a prepared response. Did that answer the question? I'm looking at some of these. What am I? Mid-career. So another thing about negotiating a raise within your current position is that it's definitely worth trying, right? That's definitely something worth trying. And it enables you to have that record of what you're doing well, have evidence for it, and then to be able to demonstrate their return on investment. So for example, have you demonstrated that the grants that you bring in are 4 times what your salary is? And therefore, have you demonstrated your worth and proven that you are worth a greater salary? Looks like we have something else here. Okay, we talked about email. Okay, yes. We talked about that. We can't see the questions. Ah, okay, good to know now that we're ending the session, but I'll keep that in mind for next time. Okay, so Yilin, is there anything you want me to say in conclusion?
I'm just wanted to apologize that I did not get a chance to introduce Molly. That is, this talk is excellent. Just next time we get ahead and prepare a little bit before we head to the talk. Yes. So thanks so much, Molly. And we are right on time, and you give us a great examples about, really how to demonstrate the negotiation and why we need to do that. And those are very important, especially for female researchers. Thanks so much, and thanks for the organizers.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.